faced a storm that sunk the ship, cursed and witches sail away. Bound for the gallows in 1618, cursed and witches haul away. Death and burning was the price to pay, cursed and witches haul away, cursed and witches sail away, haul away, boys, sail away.
This is Margaret Barclay, a young mother for the two of Irvine. And it was said that Margaret brought a petition of slander to the court session, saying that her brother-in-law, John Dean, and his wife, Janet, had called her a thief. But the Kirk, they declared that the parties should shake hands and move on. But it was said that Margaret bore ill will in her heart for what had been wrongly said against her. And not long after that, a vagabond called John Stewart was travelling through Irvine, and he foolishly implied to the provost's wife that her husband's ship had been lost at sea. Margaret was said to have cursed the ship called the Gift of God, saying these words, that I hope that that ship will sink to the bottom and that the crew will be eaten by parties, for neither sea nor salt water shall hold it. A few weeks later, two men for the ship that had sailed with John Dean and the Lord Provost at Irvine returned. And they said that all in the ship had been sunk. Well, immediately suspicion fell upon the vagabond, who was quickly arrested. And suspicion also fell on Margaret for bringing motion to the Kirk session. The night that the ship had set sail, he had went to Margaret Barclay's house, and that there, along with two other women, they had made clay figures. One of the Provost, Andrew Jane, and one of her brother-in-law, and one for the Gift of God. And that the deal had appeared in the form of a wee black duck. That they had all went to the shore and they flung the clay figures into the sea. And that the sea raged and roared and turned as red as juice in a dyer's cauldron. The beggar was kept under a heavy guard. His arms were bound together. He was visited on the night before the court session met by a minister who asked and pleaded with him that he renounce the devil and ask the Lord's forgiveness. But the beggar man said that he couldn't pray, for his hands were tied together. Perhaps the minister could release his hands. So he unbound the knots and left John Stewart the vagabond to his prayers. And when they come to fetch him for the trial, they found his body hanging against the door, for he had strangled himself with a piece of hemp for his bonnet, rather than face trial, torture, the noose and burning. He had committed suicide. Before he had died, he named another woman, and her name was Isabel Inch. But despite never seeing him before and denying any involvement with this man, they quickly took her and they put her in the belfry of the Toon Kirk. She was there for several days. She was pressed for a confession by those men, but she gave none. She claimed her innocence. But weary for sleep deprivation and the thought of what was to come, she said that she would confess all the next day if they left her alone that night to have some sleep, to take rest. And despite being bound in stocks, she climbed onto the roof of the belfry. It's not known whether she slipped or whether she flung herself off in desperation. But she was found at the bottom of the tower. She was still alive. She lived for 5 days. And each day and each night they pressed her to confess. But still she wouldn't. And she died. An innocent woman. Next was Margaret Barclay's turn. After what happened to the beggar, the court in their wisdom decided that young Margaret Barclay should face what they termed gentle torture. The only time that term has ever been used in any Scottish witchcraft trial. For how could any torture be gentle? In their wisdom, they decided that Margaret should be placed in the stocks, and her bare legs would be covered with iron weights until she confessed to witchcraft. It was said in the records that when the weight became too much for her to bear, that she cried out and that they took the weight off, but still she refused to confess. So they put it back on again, and she cried again, and this time she did confess. And she gave the name of a young lassie, 14 years old, called Isabel Crawford. Margaret was taken to trial with her confession secured. And it was said that her husband appeared then with a lawyer. And the lawyer asked, "Do you want to be represented at trial?" as you please. But all that I have said is untrue and false. And then she turned to her husband and she said, "You have been too long in coming." This statement didn't move the magistrates, who decided that her confession wasn't given under duress of torture. For she gave her confession when the iron bars had been lifted from her legs. And she was sentenced to be executed for witchcraft. But 3 deaths weren't enough for the high men in Irvine too. Another trial was set for the 14-year-old girl, Isabel. She was to suffer the same gentle torture that Margaret Barclay did. But they didn't count on the spirit of this 14-year-old girl, which was strong for life. And it was said that she withstood more than 30 stones in weight of raw iron placed upon her legs before she broke. And she shouted out, "Tack off! Tack off! I will tell all!" Just before her execution, she denied all that she had said, and she refused to pardon the executioner, as was the tradition, as if anyone could say, "That's okay, that's fine, just take my life." No, it wasn't okay. And this young girl of 14, she knew that this was wrong, but knowing something doesn't stop it from happening. And in the year 1618, she suffered the same end as Margaret Barclay. She was strangled by the hands of the hangman, and her body burnt to ash.